If you want to understand your MBTI type better, one of the best places to start is with cognitive functions. Now, there are 8 cognitive functions. Today, we're going to talk about 2 of those, extroverted sensing and introverted sensing. Okay, so if you're a sensor, today is all about you. We're going to start by talking about what extroverted sensing and introverted sensing have in common. First and foremost, they all sensors like practical information that is relevant and useful to them today. So whether you're an extroverted sensor or an introverted sensor, being practical is really important to you. Also, sensors are very focused on concrete kinds of information. So facts, data, information they can verify. They like that kind of information much more than theoretical or hypothetical information. Also, sensors really want to focus on what's real. So the name sensing or sensor comes from the fact that the information that sensors rely on first comes in through their senses. So it is real, tangible kinds of information. And finally, sensors notice and remember details. So they tend to be a lot more focused on the specifics and the details than on the big picture. And they definitely start with the details compared to starting with the big picture. All right. So that's just a really brief synopsis of what all sensors have in common. If you want more detail on that, I've got lots of videos that delve into the letters themselves. But today, I really want us to focus on getting beyond what you know about sensing in general. And I want to talk about what the differences are between extroverted sensors and introverted sensors. So to do that, let's head to the whiteboard. So what you'll see is I have on the whiteboard ISTJ and ESFP. Both of these types are sensors, and both of them are what we call dominant sensors. In other words, the sensing is their most important function. Your 2 middle letters are called your functions. I go into this in a lot more detail in my video about how we determine what your cognitive function stack is. So take a look at that if you want to know more detail. But for today, we're going to focus on the S, okay? Now, as a very quick reminder, how do we know whether the S is extroverted or introverted? Well, our J and our P and our I and our E serve as pointers for our middle 2 letters. So for people who are judgers, the J points to our judging function, which is our 3rd function, and that function is extroverted, okay? So judgers extrovert or show the world their judging function. So by definition, judgers introvert or keep in their heads their perceiving function, their 2nd function right there. And because ISTJs are introverts, introverts have their dominant function is an introverted function. So SI, introverted sensing, is the dominant function for ISTJs. And if you are a sensor and a judger, okay, there are 3 other types that are sensing judgers, ESTJ, ISFJ, and ESFJ. If you are a sensing judger, then you have introverted sensing as either your 1st or dominant function or your 2nd or auxiliary function. All right, now let's look at ESFPs. We look at the P because the P is a pointer. The P, perceiving, points to the perceiving function, which is your 2nd function. It's your information gathering function. And so that if you're a perceiver, you extrovert or show the world your extroverted function. By definition, you introvert your decision-making or judging function. But what we're concerned about today is your S. So for ESFPs, their sensing function is extroverted, and because they are extroverts, that is their dominant function. So we put SE for extroverted sensing. Now, again, just like with ISTJs, all SJs have introverted sensing. All SPs use extroverted sensing. So there are 3 other types that also use extroverted sensing. ESTP, ISTP, and ISFP. So if you are an SJ, you use introverted sensing. If you are an SP, you use extroverted sensing. So let's talk first about introverted sensing. So introverted sensors, because it is an introverted function, it is in your head, basically. It is what you think about it. You tend to be a little more introspective about that kind of a function. And so because it is in our heads, and what I think and what I've experienced might be different than what you think and what you've experienced, it is by definition, introverted sensing is by definition fairly subjective, okay? Because it's based on how I see the world. Also, because it is an introverted function, introverted sensing has an internal focus. Okay, internal focus. And finally, because it is, as I said, subjective and in my head, introverted sensing tends to be specific to me if I'm the ISTJ. So it tends to be specific, and I'm gonna put to me if that's me. Now, let's talk about extroverted sensing. Extroverted sensing, and any function that is extroverted, is focused on what's going on in your external environment rather than what's in your head. And so by definition, because we can all sort of see what's happening in our external world, extroverted functions tend to be more objective because they're based on verifiable kinds of information usually. And as I said, because it's an extroverted function, the focus is external. It's on what's happening in the world, what's happening around me at this moment in the world. And finally, it is less specific to the person and more general. And that's because it is looking at this information in the world. Now, let's talk in a little bit more detail. What does introverted sensing look like specifically when we talk about introverted sensing? What we're talking about are things like both sensors, introverted and extroverted, have good memories. But for introverted sensors, they process their memories specifically based on their experiences. And so introverted sensors tend to recall very detailed memories from their lives. They can remember really far back into the past, and they like to use the past as a reference. So for example, introverted sensors compare new experiences, what's happening today, with their internal memories and that are specific to them, and then they process what's happening today through that lens of their specific internal memories. Extroverted sensors, on the other hand, they're focused on present external experiences. So they're focused on what's happening right now, real time, in their external world and generally. And they're more aware of sort of what's going on right now. They are very focused on living in the present moment versus introverted sensors who are much more focused on the past. Okay, some other differences between introverted sensing and extroverted sensing. So introverted sensors, as I said, are all sensors who are also judgers. And so that S with the J, if you think of it as S plus J, okay? S plus J. And if you know things about judgers like to be organized, scheduled, they're planners. So when we put the subjective, internal, specific details and memories together with the J, we start to see some consistent patterns. So introverted sensors, for example, tend to be cautious. They tend to be very focused on tradition. They like to make plans, and they like things to be consistent. They tend to be less open to change. They tend to be fairly resistant to change, actually. They tend to be very highly organized in a very detailed, methodical way. And as introverted sensors, who are all judgers, they also really like structure. They like plans. And because of all of that, because of the influence of the J, introverted sensors tend to avoid risk, and they tend to be very driven towards stability. So they like routine, they like to know what's coming, and they like knowing what to expect. And so when we look at introverted sensing totally, we have to take into account the fact that all introverted sensors are also judgers. And so the S is very much influenced by that J in those ways. Now, let's do the same thing with extroverted sensing. So as I said, all SPs, sensing perceivers, are extroverted sensors. So you can also think of that as S plus P. And so for extroverted sensors, who are S plus P, think about what you know about perceivers in general. So in general, perceivers tend to be flexible. They tend to be laid back. They tend to be easygoing, open to change. Often they seek out change. So when we look at extroverted sensors, that P influences the S. And so extroverted sensors tend to be more spontaneous. They tend to be able to improvise very well in the moment. They are really great at looking at objective, external, general kinds of real, verifiable information, because they're sensors, and extrapolating what that means in the moment with what they should do in the moment. So extroverted sensors are really, really good at taking action in the moment. Sometimes they can appear to be impulsive, but what they're really doing is they're taking in all of the details, all of the sensory information in real time around them and processing it very quickly, and then they're making decisions based on that. So they can look impulsive, and sometimes extroverted sensors sometimes feel like intuitives, because when you put the S and the P together, they are able to be very intuitive in the moment. But it's not true intuition. It's using the sensory details and information around them to make quick decisions in the moment, kind of based on their gut. But it's very much about what's happening right now. They struggle to be intuitive long term, which is why they are not Ns. But a lot of times when people are, if you're trying to decide between whether you're an S or an N, if you are a perceiver, you could very well be an S who feels intuitive in the moment. So also, because of that S plus that P, extroverted sensors tend to react really quickly. They also, believe it or not, tend to be risk takers, thrill seekers. They're open to all of that because they're taking in what's happening right now and they just want to go with it. And that P makes them so much more spontaneous. So they like taking risks, doing really exciting things that are energizing from their environment right away. So let's quickly recap. Introverted sensing. All introverted sensors are sensors who are also judgers. Because their S is introverted, it is internal to their in their heads most of the time. It is subjective. It is an internal focus and an internal function, and it is specific to that person. Because the S plus the J together, introverted sensors value consistency, they tend to be cautious, they tend to be very responsible, and they like familiarity and things that they can count on. They also tend to avoid risks. All right, let's summarize extroverted sensing. Extroverted sensors are all SPs, S plus P. Because it is an extroverted function, it is more objective because it is focused on the external environment and what's happening right now. And it tends to be more general about what's going on in the world rather than what's going on in my head. And when we add the S and the P together, what we see is that extroverted sensors are able to react more quickly. They can look and feel intuitive in the moment because they gather those sensory details and make a decision quickly. And they can be very spontaneous and impulsive. Okay, so that is an explanation of both the similarities, but even more importantly, the differences between extroverted sensing and introverted sensing. So hopefully, if you are a sensor, you have a much better understanding today of the details and specifics that are true to you based on whether you're an extroverted sensor or an introverted sensor. I hope that you found this video helpful and informative, and if so, I'd love it if you could give it a thumbs up. And if you want more detailed videos about MBTI, please subscribe for more videos like this. Thanks so much. See you next time.